Happy Hanukkah, everyone. This class begins right as we enter into this holiday. So I welcome you all. Hanukkah spirit. We have transformed this room in the past years in different ways, through sounds and drums and didgeridoos and different exotic instruments. And we shall try to do so in other ways tonight as well. So I begin with saying again, everyone, a happy Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the festival of light. So may light dominate in your life. And we all have our moments and the corners and experiences of darkness. So Hanukkah's message, without even elaborating, is that light is more powerful than darkness. That's the bottom line. And a little light can dispel much darkness. And it isn't even a battle. Like when you deal with fire and water, for example. So fire and water are two adversarial forces that can neutralize each other and annihilate each other. Enough water can extinguish great fires, and enough fire can evaporate large bodies of water. And they fight. As we see, whenever water and fire meet, there's a battle going on. When it comes to light and dark, interestingly, even on a natural scientific level, there is no battle. You bring a little light even into the darkest room, in the area where that light is burning, there's no match. Light will always dominate. The only thing is, if it's a very dark, very large room, obviously you need a lot more light. But it's not like a matter of a resistance, where the darkness does not let the light control the situation. So in a sense, really, darkness is the absence of light. So of course, if you don't show up darkness will prevail. But if light shows up, light will always be dominant over darkness, as opposed to fire and water. And that's a critical message in life, because very often our enemies, our perceived enemies, are not really have any substance. If you don't bring in anything positive, of course, the negative will dominate. And I would say, from my own humble experiences, dealing with psychological darkness and psychological challenges, I would say that's 95% the case. I would say even higher than 95%. Just don't want to, 100% is always too presumptuous. That in most situations, the problem is not that a person doesn't have the strengths; they just don't let the strengths emerge. So who controls by default is whoever is in place, and it's usually the darkness, the fears, the inhibitions, the insecurities, and that becomes the dominant force, not because of its power, but by default. And as soon as you introduce a little amount of light, things change. So that's the bottom line message of Hanukkah. We'll discuss it more at length this evening, hopefully. So I want to wish everybody that take that message to heart. And sadly, I see people, years go by, sometimes decades, and people don't realize this simple point, that they have a certain strength, but their status quo is so powerful. Their comfort zone, as miserable as it may be, is so powerful that the reigning force is their own dark state. And the trouble they get into is not because there isn't any hope anywhere, but they don't let the hope in. And if you don't let light in, there's no question darkness will prevail. So we can give all kinds of excuses and say we have this dark force and that dark force and this happened to me, that happened to me. But the question is, are you allowing light into your life, or you're letting darkness by default just, it's like not showing up to court. So of course you're going to have a judgment against you because you didn't show up. And sometimes we're afraid to. So Hanukkah, if anything, if it doesn't teach us this, I don't know what it teaches us, that you have to bring light into your life. And light means not in your terms, but you have to ask an objective person what they think is light. And as uncomfortable as it may be, this may be your salvation. So that's my blessing to everyone here. I hope I'm not coming on too heavy, but some of you probably know directly what I mean, some indirectly, and everybody can apply it in their own personal way, as well as myself. So that's my happy Hanukkah. As you know, I'm not going to just give you a few accolades and nice platitudes. I have to touch, of course, the so-called darker part of our souls. If we're going to talk about Hanukkah, there's darkness, there's light, etc. So we shall try to do a little open heart surgery with the intention of not hurting anyone, but really exploring and digging deeper into our own self, into our own dark places and our light places, because that's ultimately why Hanukkah's relevance to us in our lives. So, on that note, I want to also say the class is dedicated by Matthew. He says in honor of the MLC family. That's how he wanted us to put it. So, he's dedicated this class. And I want to also personally dedicate it as well to my new grandson, who was born yesterday. My first grandson. So I have a granddaughter, now it's a grandson, that was born yesterday to my daughter Rashi in California. And may everybody be blessed with their own simchas and joyous occasions, whatever it is that you need, whether it's finding a soulmate and then having a child, or having nachas from the children you have, or whatever other way it manifests. Everyone's got their own particular ways to celebrate light. As we're talking about, everybody has some sources of light. There's no one on earth, no matter how dark their life is, doesn't have some spark somewhere. The key is to hold on to it and to fan the flames and make it more substantial than just a spark, a pilot flame. So that's as far as the dedications go. What we're also going to do, I'll just wait for more people to come, we'll also do, obviously, Hanukkah. We'll light the menorah here. Very nicely set up by our own good old Velvel. And we'll maybe sing a song or two. And I'll share with you the traditional song I always sing Hanukkah. So this will be a Hanukkah party after all. It may not be with drums and didgeridoos, as I said, but it'll be with the soul. And that ultimately is really what counts. The instruments are only there to enhance the soul's experience. So everyone agrees with that? Okay. And it's also administratively easier to do. So let's put it that way. So to deal with souls may be more complex psychologically, but it's administratively much easier in this world. So with that said, let's get straight into the topic at hand. I titled the class, Your Dark Side and Your Light Side, Who Dominates? Your dark side versus your light side. We send out every Wednesday morning a reminder about the class and the topic, and those that to watch it also online for those that want to. If you don't get those announcements, just tell Golda Malka at the front and she'll put you on the list. It's just a friendly reminder every Wednesday. So that's why I'm mentioning it, because I always like to live up to what we promise. And so your dark side versus your light side, who dominates? Which of course is essentially the theme of Hanukkah. So before we get into the thicker things, I want to pose a few key questions and address it from a perspective of Hanukkah. Hanukkah is one of those holidays many people know about. It's become the so-called Jewish Christmas for some. Same season, it's a holiday season, gifts and all that stuff, and the sales. But as you know, anyone coming here knows, that Hanukkah precedes Christmas by many years. And more importantly, its real message is one that is deeply spiritual. And as I always ask the question, the relevance. What is the relevance of the Hanukkah story? So it's several thousand years now, over almost 2,500 years since the Hanukkah miracle took place during the second temple. So what is the relevant message to us today? We may have a didgeridoo after all. If we all let our cell phones play its tunes, we would have a nice musical. So it's personal relevant message. And of course, to understand that, we have to dissect somewhat the story of Hanukkah, but more importantly, also dissect our lives and see how they match. And find, as we'll see, we'll find some fascinating insights where Hanukkah can really change your life, to put it bluntly. And that's the key challenge of a holiday like this, and the challenge that I take upon myself to try to lead us in that type of discussion, and in a way that helps us illuminate, no pun intended, the darker crevices of our psyches and our souls, to be able to really come away with a deeper understanding of ourselves, and more importantly, our tools, life skills and tools to do something about our lives and improve it. So, in a way, Hanukkah, in a way, is so obvious because of its light and dark theme. It just jumps out at you immediately, its relevance. Because as I said, we all struggle with light and darkness all the time, one way or another. We're not just talking about physical light and dark, we're talking about psychological, emotional. Just imagine for a moment, sometimes to imagine the contrast, it gives you contrast and context. Just imagine a life where you were able to see your inner unconscious all the time. And you were able to understand why you make certain decisions. What kind of life you'd have. A life of complete clarity, complete transparency. I know some of us are terrified of the concept. But let's talk about the positive side of it. Where you wouldn't have to guess how you're going to react. Where you would know what path to take. Where you would meet somebody in a relationship and know this is the right person, not the right person. And not have to go through all the anguish and grief of groping and exploring and trial and error and all that it comes with. So imagine a life like that, of complete clarity, complete light. So you can imagine, by contrast, look at your life as it is. And I say yours, I mean all of us. We live in a dark world. A dark world means we don't know the paths ahead of us and where we're going and where we're headed. Like no one knows what tomorrow will bring, what curveball will be thrown at you. We often don't know where salvation will come from. I mean, we know a little, but the older we get, we realize how little we know and how we are, in a way, groping and trying to make our way, and it's usually through many mistakes. And then, of course, come our own inept or weak psychological tools that may not even be our fault from childhood. We just may perhaps not developed a sense of confidence or trust or nurturing, and we have to constantly protect ourselves, and we're, in a sense, like in a battle. So however you twist and turn it, life is full of dark situations. Now, when I say dark, I don't mean dark always, dark can be very foreboding. Dark could also be ignorance. You say ignorance is a form of darkness. When you don't know something. So you're in the dark, so to speak. When you know, light is compared to knowledge, information, awareness. And then, of course, there's real darkness. Real darkness means true dark corners or pockets of our psyches. Those dark places where we don't like to go to, where we really try to hide it, where we maybe have a lot of shame, even an ugly side to each of us. Those dark corners in our lives where nobody else can see, and we know ourselves in that way, not necessarily in a very proud way. And it's something that's not really talked about precisely because it's so-called dark. Darkness means we don't talk about it. And everyone's has their skeletons, their ugly secrets, and many different areas. Obviously, in the sexual world, the sexual personality we have is full of all kinds of darkness in many ways, and sometimes more darkness than light. And I'm just using that as an example because these are the things that people carry inside them: experiences, the need for love and for intimacy, and all that comes with our own internal lives. So yes, what's going on the outside, you go to work, we all know how to put on masks and faces and know how to cope. Maybe some of us better than others, perhaps. As a matter of fact, some people who have very deep darkness and lonely darkness inside are excellent survivors and cope great. They're extremely proficient at putting on a great act. And not only an act, they actually learn to survive well. They're very good maneuverers and manipulators, etc. And again, I don't mean this necessarily in a negative way, just mean it as a part of reality. So I'm only broadening the subject to really make it relevant. This is when you talk about light and darkness, covers some of what I just said, and of course a lot more. I can't list every particular way darkness manifests in our lives. I'm sure if you use a little of your imagination, it won't be hard to figure out some things, some of your darkest moments, or some of your darkest corners, or some of your darkest secrets. And then there's light, the light in our soul, the bright times in our lives, happy times. Unfortunately, many people will tell us that the brighter times are not as numerous and frequent as the darker times. And that's another issue, dark and light, as they're juxtaposed in how they deal with each other. And even if you have moments of respite, many of us feel that our natural state, as I mentioned earlier, the status quo, we gravitate back to the darker place. And and from time to time, we have some type of freedom, some respite, some joy, some celebration. So these are real topics in our lives. And of course, the real question is, are we doomed? Are we stuck? Is it fatalistic? It is who you are. Is that where you're going to stay the rest of your life, with a little maneuvering, a little improvement here, a little improvement there? Like those bobbing the toys inside of a bathtub. You push one down, another one pops up, and the rest of your life you're busy pushing and bobbing and push and pull, and more or less everything. Usually, it's like they say: the more things change, the more they stay the same. So yes, we change a little here, then something else pops up here. It's one of those things. You just can't really, some people dealing with weight issues have this thing. It's like a metabolism, a certain equilibrium. You lose a little, you gain a little, but you always gravitate back to a certain so-called average, common average. And so that's really the story of our lives, that we are essentially destined to remain where we are with a little tinkering and tampering here and there. Or can we do something about it? And obviously, coming from me, you realize it's a rhetorical question. Obviously, I want to say is that we can do much. But I'm posing the question because some of us may have that question. Can I really do something about it? And as we get older, and our arteries harden, so do our attitudes and our hopes. And sometimes as we get older, we start losing hope. When you're younger and more ideological and more flexible and more resilient, you are more hopeful and so on. So all this is part of the questions that I think are vital. Because if a person doesn't even have hope that things can change, so we can talk philosophy all night and Hanukkah lessons. The bottom line is if you don't feel the confidence that you can do something about it, it'll just remain an academic cerebral exercise and discussion. So that's a critical point of infusing ourselves with hope that things can be different. And I'm going to address that as well. And then, even if one says, okay, I'm hopeful or I believe that things can change, the question then is what should be the game plan? What's the strategy? How do we begin? Where do you begin? Sometimes big goals, you don't even know where to begin. They're so big. What are the first steps, the baby steps, the small steps, and what leads to bigger steps? And how do you maintain it? Because we all know inspiration is not that difficult. You can get inspired. You turn on some song you like, you go to some party. There's many escapist ways to get inspired. Or at least to, let's put it this way, get some relief from the misery. The question is, can you maintain it? Maintenance contracts are much more expensive than purchasing the product. And I remember a few years ago, somebody wanted to open up a shidduch service, which is like, matchmaking service. They wanted me to be involved. So I said, look, I could send you people, but I can't really be involved. First of all, you can get sued because things don't work out. That was the joking part of it. But more importantly, I said, the problem is not finding shidduchim matches. The problem is the maintenance contract. That's the key. Because, and not that to say that to meet the right person is easy, but that really is a small part of the issue. Because if everyone meets someone, then the question is how long it lasts. A month, 2 months, a year. And we all know, initially, honeymoon stage, things are always better, but when it comes to the realities, the day-to-day details, and when the glamour isn't there quite, and the novelty, that's when it's the real question. Then is the relationship maintainable, so to speak? And that's a whole other, so that's much more complicated. So he said to me, so what do you want to do, open up a maintenance service as well? I said, I don't have to open one, I'm already in it. And not that I chose to be it, but again, by default, people come to me, and that's really always the issue. It's not the issue how to ignite something or how to keep it going for another day or two. It's how to keep it going, and more importantly, not to have to come back to me or to anyone else for advice. You should just be able to work it out. Tools. Give people the tools. So all this is part of, I would say, the challenges of light and dark in our lives. And of course, relationships always loom large whenever you talk about this, because relationship is that area that's both, you can't live with it, you can't live without it, as they say. It's all full of confusion. It's emotional. Emotions always are fraught with the darkness. And when I say darkness, I don't mean darkness as a negative. I mean with confusion, because you're emotional about it. When you're emotional, you're not objective. If you're not objective, you can be very clear-headed. And you make decisions that are based on the moment. Sometimes they seem so rational, and then they end up being terrible. So when it comes to emotions and relationships, if darkness is prominent in our life, that's where it really takes on, as I said, looms large, because the emotional state of being is not very conducive to creating clarity. Now that doesn't mean a relationship shouldn't have emotions. It just means how do you balance it with some type of objective sobriety, where you have a certain clarity of how you deal with things. So all these questions really come down to one big question: is what do we do with this dark and light part of ourselves? Who's the dominant force? Can we change things? And I mean it in very practical, personal terms in our own personal lives. Because we're not talking about a darkness in your soul or in your psyche that's just sitting there and doesn't have any effect on you. It impacts every decision you make. Let's be honest. You wake up in the morning, of course, when we have a job, so there's certain coordinates that are locked into your life. But everything else is dependent very much on your fears and insecurities, where you're going to take risks, what are you going to try, what are you not going to try. It's all, basically every major decision, every small decision that has any emotional import and impact is affected by the shadows and the lights in our souls. So if you think of it in those terms, Hanukkah then is an extremely central holiday, because that's what the whole holiday is all about. It's about light. It's called the Festival of Lights, celebration of light, and therefore, if you think of it in terms of, okay, so here's my life, and the Torah promises that Chayenu v'Erech Yameinu, the Torah is our life and our sustenance. The Torah is a blueprint and a guide for life. So here's Hanukkah talking about light. Here's my life that is driven so much by light and darkness. So what does Hanukkah have to say to me? And if you don't come up with an answer, the tragedy is such that the holiday remains basically irrelevant. Yeah, it's relevant in context of the warmth. You eat latkes, what do they call it? The jelly donuts. I don't know how it evolved from latkes, but I guess it's all oil based. Yeah, I got it. And it's a nice holiday, lighting candles, flames, and family, and gifts, and Hanukkah gelt. I mean, it has a lot of nostalgia. Many people love Hanukkah. People who have healthy families definitely love Hanukkah. People who have dysfunctional families, many hate Hanukkah. Not because of Hanukkah, because any type of family get-together it's not full of good memories. So the point is that is on a very nostalgic and a very basic level. But as we're discussing here, is not just a nice holiday for a few days, we do nice things, but something profound, the message, what is the lesson? So to really get into how to apply those Hanukkah to the darkness and light in our own lives, I think it's important to relate somewhat the story of Hanukkah and the significance of it, and why do we celebrate with light? So I'll begin with a question, basic Talmudic question. So the way the Talmud says it in the tractate Shabbos, it says, "My Hanukkah." What's Hanukkah? That's how the Talmud phrases it, and it could go and it explains that there was the story. Then the times of the Hashmonaim, this was a group of Jewish leaders. The Greeks, the Hellenistic Greeks, attacked and desecrated the synagogue. I'm sorry, the temple, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And the Talmud continues, and they desecrated, defiled all the oil. And you know, in the temple, the menorah was lit every day, and every day was had to be lit as the Torah says specifically in Parshat Tetzaveh. I'm really just quoting the basics because some people don't even know the basic story. The Torah says that you should light the menorah every day with shaman zayah, pure olive oil, that was not touched by anybody, pure olive oil, untouched. And here there was no oil left, so the Talmud continues that when they came and they finally got rid of the Greeks, they began looking for oil. They couldn't find anything until they found one small flask cruse of oil that only had enough to burn for one day. And the miracle was, well, some say the second miracle was, the first miracle was that they found it. And some say the second miracle was that it burned not just for one day, for 8 days. And therefore, the Talmud continues, next year they designated Hanukkah to honor and celebrate this miracle of the oil through lighting a menorah of 8 flames, 8 candles. And we do that till this very day. That's the short of it. That's what the Talmud says. But as always, when you start thinking about it, there are many questions. I won't go through all of them because there are many that I can't cover here. But the basic question that's asked is, one second here. It almost seems like almost incidental, the lighting of the menorah. The real thing here was the victory over the Greeks. You know, the fact that they defiled the menorah, they also defiled other things. So it's true they found the oil and the oil burned and so on. But if you really think about it, it was a result because they won the war. And as we say actually in the prayer on Hanukkah, we had a prayer in the benching and in Shemoneh Esrei, we say that the miracle was, I'm just reading, I'll translate. The miracle was that that they won a war and the strong were vanquished by the weak, meaning the few minority Jews, the small group of Hashmonaim, Maccabees, conquered the strong, mighty Greek army. The many were conquered by the few. The impure ones were conquered by the pure. The Rishayim, the wicked ones, by the tzaddikim. Basically a conquest of quality over quantity. That though the small Maccabee group of resistance was a small, weak army, it was a great miracle that they were able to conquer the large Greek army. Very similar like the 6-day war, if you wish. So that seems to be the main miracle, because if that did not happen, they wouldn't even have the opportunity to light the menorah. And we don't really even know about this battle or the victory of the battle. We mentioned in the prayer, but you don't see it commemorated on Hanukkah at all. On Hanukkah, you see the lighting of the menorah every night, for 8 days. And that's the central mitzvah. I mean, there's some prayers that are said. So the question is, why light? Why is light the central theme of Hanukkah? And that's one question. And then there are some other questions which I'll probably touch upon, which include also why 8? It's true that it burned for 8 days. Okay, fine, that's a miracle. The commentaries explain why 8 days, why not 9, 10, 7? Because it took 8 days for them to press new fresh oil and transport it and bring it to the temple. Because the oil was not pressed there, it was brought from other places. In Jerusalem there were no olive branches. So it took 8 days. But the question is a bigger one. The menorah in the temple had 7 candles, not 8. Had 7 branches. This is stated in the text in the Bible. So why do we light a menorah of 8? So technically, halachically, one of the reasons is because to distinguish. It says we shouldn't create an illusion that we have the temple today. So in many ways we change things. But still, you're commemorating a mitzvah of 7. It seemed more appropriate to have a menorah of 7. Why 8? Another question or two is this. The menorah was lit in the morning. And here we light the Hanukkah in the evening as the sun sets. The menorah was lit inside the temple. Yes, it shined outward, but it was primarily an internal experience. And the menorah Hanukkah we light at the door or at the window, clearly stating that it should be seen outside. The menorah in the temple was not near any window. It was inside in an inner sanctum of the temple. Its light was so powerful that it shined outwards. The windows in the temple were like a funnel, narrow on the inside and wide on the outside. But the bottom line is that the menorah was not at the window nor at the door. So almost in every possible respect, Hanukkah is like almost deliberately being done, not like the menorah in the temple, though all it is commemorating the menorah in the temple. So I could add many more questions, but this is, I think, enough for now. And as you'll see, by answering these questions, we'll have the answer to the most important question, as I said, the relevance to our personal lives. So what exactly really is the story of light and the story of Hanukkah? So really it goes back to what their war was. Why did the Greeks, what were they battling? The Greeks were not like, for example, Haman and the Persians. Haman in the story of Purim wanted to destroy the Jews like Hitler. Physically destroy every Jew. That was a decree. Here there was no such decree. The Greeks were not interested in killing the Jews. That was not their goal. What their war was against the spirituality of the Jews. It says in some places, and it says Levush and other commentaries, they say, Purim was a victory, the battle against the Jewish body, and the victory of the Jewish body, and Hanukkah is the battle against the Jewish soul and the victory of the Jewish soul. Which is why Purim is celebrated so much in a much more body-like way, meal, sending food gifts, and Hanukkah is celebrated through light, which is more sublime, as we'll soon see, spiritual. What was the battle of the Greeks? What did they not like about the Jewish spirituality, so to speak? So we have right here in this prayer that I just mentioned, it says that the Greeks wanted to make the Jews forget Rashkicham Teirasecha, to forget your Torah, which means God's Torah, and to have them violate the laws of your will, of God's will, God's commandments. So the interesting emphasis here, it doesn't say that they wanted to make the Torah be forgotten and they wanted to violate the laws. They wanted to make your Torah, that it should be your Torah, God's Torah. They had no problem, the Greeks, because they were philosophers, they were thinkers. They had no problem with the wisdom of Torah, with the morality of Torah as a human system. But they had a major problem with it being a divine element. being godly, that God said, this is my Torah, that it's holy. I'll just give you an example of a major conflict between the Jews and the Greeks at the time, just to show you. The Greeks worshipped logic, and they worshipped their own way of looking at things. And the Jews refused to accept that. For instance, in those days, laws of morality talk about moral relativism. Listen to this. The Greeks felt that it was noble and compassionate, it's hard to even repeat, to kill children that are born handicapped or in any way mentally or in other ways deficient, in their words, because it's a rachmanis. By killing the child, you're really putting the child out of misery and the family out of misery and society. So just children born that in any way had a defect were killed right instantaneously. They were thrown down from a mountain. Check it out. Yeah, I don't think you'll stay in your bubble bath long when you read that, right? Well, they thought that was humane. We could argue the point. Some people feel there's certain things that are humane, others feel is murder. Even today. So let's not. There are debates that rage about this. I'm not here to get into political discussion. I'm just telling you, you can check it out. And they saw the Jews as barbaric because the Jews refused to do this. Now, here's the question. Who decides what's moral? If, God forbid, a guy gets up on the Brooklyn Bridge and wants to jump off and has no family and no children and he won't hurt anybody except himself, what gave us the right to infringe on his personal right to mobilize the police and the fire and the whole forces and make a whole fuss and not let a person commit suicide? Why? Because the consensus in our society is that it's a destructive thing to someone who kills himself. There must be something wrong with him. And we draw the line. The Bill of Rights does not protect a person from doing something that's insane or damaging. But you could argue, and there are libertarians that argue, that freedom means complete freedom. Yeah, you're not free to murder somebody else, but hurting yourself, hey, may not be something we like, but who are we to stop someone? Well, my point is, when you deal with morality is very complicated. As sociologists have pointed out, and they've tested it in classrooms, and I could do it here if you wish, but I don't want to do it because sometimes the results are quite horrific. That when you push people to the wall, people do not agree about what moral standards are. You have all these type of tests, groups of people who've been tested that if you had a button to press and a train was going to ride and it was going to hit somebody, or the train would hit another train, which one would you press? So you find all kinds of weird and bizarre choices people make that some would consider to be very not moral at all. Because when it comes to morality, what is the litmus test? Is it our conscience? Is it our parents' conscience? Is it the consensus, the majority of society? Some people, there are things that some people consider moral today, others consider, as I said, very immoral. Especially if you go around the globe, you'll find in different societies things that we would find horrible, others consider to be part of the ritual. Look, some people consider circumcision of Jewish children, boys 8 days old, as being barbaric. There are people that consider that. And the Jewish people have been doing it from the beginning of time of Abraham. Now no one argues that you wouldn't. The Jews only argue the reason we do it is not because we decided to do it, but because God said so in the Torah. So you're dealing here with morality that is very, very subjective. To really point it out, do you think the Germans during World War II didn't have rationalization? If anyone that knows a bit of how the human body works right now, inside of your human body, there are let's call it secret police that roam about your body looking for germs and will attack them mercilessly because they will destroy the rest of the body. So Germans, in their distorted philosophy, decided to apply the same model to the entire larger organism. Who says that there aren't certain groups of people, whether you call them gypsies or Jews or other misfits in their mind that are germs and that infect, like bacteria, the rest of the human organism. What logical argument do you have against that? The only logical argument I have is, who are you to decide? That's the only argument. Who are you to decide and play God and decide who is an infection and who's bacteria and who's the pure Aryan, etc., etc. But if you don't go with the God and you don't go with any sanctity of life, if those in control could decide, we decide that we feel that certain people contaminate the race, and this type of so-called ethnic cleansing can be very solidly philosophically justified if you don't have to answer to someone higher than yourself. Think of the Founding Fathers' brilliance in putting into the Declaration of Independence one line that changes everything. That every human being, by the divine, they say clearly, has inalienable divine rights. And they use the word created. All men or all people are created equal. It says men, but if there's a Jew, it's really all people. But all created equal. They didn't have to write created equal. They could have written born equal, are equal. They used 2 or 3 times divine, creator, created. Why? They were not trying to push religion, because clearly they were separating religious states, the church and state. Many of them were deists. They were not trying to create a religious country, by no means. And they made it very clear. Why would they use words like created and created that would create problems? Till this day, nobody will ever amend that. Because they understood one brilliant wisdom, which is this. If it's not the Creator that gives us those rights, and we give each other those rights, we could also take away those rights. Then a group of people can say, the Protestants, the majority of the country, can say, you know what? Jews and Catholics don't have those rights. They're not as equal as we are. But if it comes from God, who created us all, then there's nobody can take that away from anyone. And that is etched in stone. It's a simple premise. You don't even need to be religious to understand that. It's interesting because I've talked to many friends of mine that are atheists or agnostics or don't believe in God and don't want God in any way imposed upon them. And when I ask them, what would you write in the Declaration of Independence? Let's say you wouldn't write the word created. The interesting thing is, one who believes that God gave inalienable rights gives the right to an atheist to be an atheist. Would an atheist give the person of faith the same right? That would be a question, because if he doesn't have a solid bedrock that guarantees rights, because there is no God, then would I'm not saying atheists are immoral or not going to be just, but what would be the unwavering promise that you for sure will have equal rights? And look at the Germans. They were not considered to be a third world country and barbarians and primitive. They were considered the top in music and art and philosophy. I mean, the Germans were considered to be and considered themselves, and they were considered in the Western civilization the best of the best. And look what happened to their scientists and to doctors and to thinkers, and even musicians and artists. Once you start distorting, once you take away the element that we all answer to some higher power, morality can take on all the most bizarre twists and turns. I'm not trying to make a case here for God, by the way. That's not my point. Even though it is a case for God, my point is that the bottom line is, I don't know what the alternative is. Like Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst system he's ever found, but he hasn't found a better one yet. What else can guarantee? The Founding Fathers understood nothing else could guarantee such equal rights unless it's created, or unless we are all in the same boat. And that's, if you think about it, unbelievable, because no government before them ever instituted that as an established type of government. It was never that way. The monarchs and the kings and the church, all prior to the United States of America, all considered themselves as being the ones that were closer to God, or God, if not God himself. And they did not see that their subjects and their citizens as being equal to them. So this is a fundamental principle in Judaism. So to go back to the Greeks and the Jews basically said, look, morality is not defined by you, not by me. It's not a consensus. It's not up to a majority. If the majority of the United States would suddenly vote, God forbid, to institute what the Greeks did, would that suddenly make it moral? Some people may argue that, but the Jews would never argue, because we answer to a higher authority who gave life and is the only one that can tell us. And the Greeks did not like that, because that, bottom line, meant that you worship God more than you worship yourself. You worship God more than you worship Greek philosophy. The interesting thing is, we don't know who the grandchildren of the Greeks are, but we sure know who the grandchildren of the Jews are, even though they were a minority. So someone did prevail at the end, interestingly. If this sounds like I'm pulling rank, I actually am. So, because I'm here to talk about it. I'm here to tell about it. And I know we have to give equal time to the Greeks, but the Greeks today are not interested in engaging in this discussion. They have other issues. They're not into the celebration of Hanukkah or the celebration of. It's not like we have an enemy here that says, you know what, your Hanukkah is our Tisha B'Av or something. You know, it's not like we have that issue here. In Israel, there's more of that type of thing. What we consider to be 1948, the war of liberation, they consider to be the war of tragedy, whatever. But when it comes to Hanukkah, we've got a full what's it called the playing field is all ours. Okay. So with that being said, so what happened then? What was the battle really going on? The battle was an ideological battle. The Greeks were not interested in killing the Jews. They didn't believe in that. They were not interested in destroying them. They did not like the idea of this type of divine Torah. No problem. You have morals, beautiful morals in the Torah. Great wisdom. But why do you have to call it Torah Secha, God's Torah? Why do you have to call it Chukei Ritzenecha, God's laws? Call it laws and wisdom. But the Jews insisted no. And that was the battle. There was a battle. That was the battle. And what prevailed, obviously prevailed, was who won out? The spirituality won out. What is the symbol of spirituality? The symbol of spirituality is light. Light. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, it says. In the book of Proverbs, the soul of a human being is the flame or lamp of God. It's a verse. It says about Torah mitzvahs the same thing. Ner mitzvah v'Torah are the lamp of mitzvah, the light of mitzvah, the candle of mitzvah, and the light of Torah. Light is the closest thing, the flames and light are the closest approximation of the physical world of what the soul looks like. So the war was not just a war over territory, it wasn't a war over property, it wasn't a war over vengeance, it was a spiritual war, it was a war over light. And therefore, we celebrate it with light. So it's not incidental at all. It's not like we think of it in terms of, oh, they won the war, and then they happened to find a cruise of oil, and that oil burned for 8 days, and that's why we celebrate. The war itself was about light, and that's why they found the cruise of oil, and that's why it was so significant. It was symbolic of the essential war that they were fighting. Because the defilement of the oil was the same idea. Why do you care? Who cares? As long as you have oil, what difference does it make? The oil burns the flames, if it's clean oil or not clean oil. But the Jews insisted, as the Torah says, Shemen Zayis Zoch, it has to be pure. To use an example that we all can relate to, one of the Rebbes, the Friedrich Rebbe, when he came to America, he had a debate with some of the Jewish education system here, because he was insisting that you should have teachers that teach Judaism have to be people who are role models. Who, if you teach about Shabbos, you got to keep Shabbos. If you teach about kosher, you have to keep kosher. So one of the leaders of the federation said to him, or the Jewish the Board of Education, said to him, Rebbe, we understand what you're saying, but we're living in times of a fire. In times of a fire, whatever water you can find, you put out the water, clean water, dirty water. The fire of ignorance. Children need teachers. So it's true, we all agree they're not the best teachers. They're not role models. But it's, at least it's water. It's water putting out the fire. And listen to his answer. He said, if it was water, I wouldn't be a problem. But if it's oil, because remember, when a teacher teaches a child to be moral and ethical, and then the child sees that the teacher is not moral and ethical, that's not neutral. It's not dirty water on a fire. That's actually damaging, because the student learns. Remember, you learn also from what you see. You don't only learn what you're told. You learn. But the simple message is this: you can teach one thing and do the other. You can talk one thing and not behave that way. That, in many ways, is more destructive than not learning about it in the first place. Think about child psychology. Which do you think is worse? Let's say talk about Shabbos. It doesn't matter Shabbos, kosher, morality. You teach a child to be kind to someone. And then the child looks, whether you like it or not, sees you're not kind. Okay? Would it have been better not to teach the child to be kind, or would it have been better to teach and let the child see the hypocrisy? You can make a strong argument that if you're not taught anything, damage wouldn't have been done. By you teaching it, you also taught the child you can teach something and not live up to it. Which means that the knowledge has nothing to do with behavior. Like Bertrand Russell said, then they asked him once, he behaved unethically, so they asked him, how is it you teach ethics at Cambridge, how is it that you can behave so unethically? He said, I also teach mathematics, and I'm not a triangle. You know? This is the core essence of academia, where the academic, the teacher, stands apart of the ideas. Which means you can teach ideas brilliantly, but you don't have to live up to it. You can be a doctor and tell people not to smoke, and you can smoke. What's the contradiction? And if you think about it, you say, yeah, what difference does it make? He's telling me the truth. Okay, he's not living up to it. Now, contrast that with the Rambam. Maimonides writes in the laws, Hilchos Deis, so laws like ethics, chapter 5, he writes the following. If you want to recognize a wise person, a chacham, is look at not how brilliant he is and how his oratory skills and teaching skills, but look at how he behaves, the details of his behavior, how he walks, how he talks, how he eats, how he sleeps, how he deals in business, the details, the non-glamorous things. It's very good when you're putting on a show, but the small details. In other words, the exact opposite of Russell. It doesn't mean that we're all perfect, but the standard, you see, Russell the damage he did was not that he said, I'm not perfect. If he would have said, look, I teach morality, I'm trying my best. He made it like a philosophy that you don't have to be what you teach. It's like initially that way. It doesn't even matter. In Judaism, it's absolutely unacceptable because the seamlessness of emes, of truth, means it has to be true throughout. From your thought, through your speech, to your action. Now then you can say, look, we're human beings and we make our mistakes, but we never create a philosophy out of our mistakes. We shouldn't deify our mistakes and say, hey, you know something, I'm a great teacher, I'm brilliant, it doesn't really matter how I behave. That's not true, it doesn't matter how you behave. You could say you're not perfect and you make mistakes and you regret them, but you don't create a philosophy out of this dichotomy between ideas and actions. And that was part of the battle, the seamlessness, the truth of it all. And therefore, going back to light, the celebration of light, the lighting of a menorah, that was what the war was all about. So now, going back to the pure oil, yes, it's important that it should be pure. Obviously, no one's perfect, but we want to give our children a pure experience. You don't want to defile them earlier than necessary. They're going to be defiled plenty in life. There'll be plenty of challenges. We live in a dark world. But to go ahead and like intentionally, and that's what that Rebbe was saying, teach them. Use a teacher that's going to teach them that you don't have to live up to what you learn in a very blatant way. To him, that was like putting oil on the fire, not water. So yes, dirty water doesn't matter when you have a fire, but oil matters because it makes the fire worse. And it creates a distortion of what we expect. So very much that's why you find in Judaism the principle of purity. Children are like pure olive oil. You light a menorah, you want pure olive oil. It's not just about getting the light burning. And who cares what kind of oil you use? It's not correct. It's what the ingredients are. And the menorah is supposed to be pure light and therefore with pure oil. So when they discovered the pure oil, it was symbolic that they had won the war in more ways than one. They had won the war that light will win over darkness. That spirit will win over matter. The Greeks believed very much, the Olympics, built in Greece, was very much the worshipping of the human body as well. And for the Jews, it was always more the soul than the body. Some say too much soul and too little body, but that's another story. But the point being, however, not body instead of soul. So, bottom line is, light is the celebration of soul, and Hanukkah is the celebration of the soul. Now, how does that translate into the actual miracle? So they find the oil, the pure oil, then it burns for 8 days. And that's how now we celebrate. And so what does that mean in our lives? It means the following. And this will answer why it's 8, and why at night, and why by the door or by the window. See, Hanukkah was not just the celebration of a menorah. The menorah burned every day before Hanukkah took place. That was a mitzvah, and that was a beautiful thing. Hanukkah's message was not that that we light a menorah every day. That we knew without Hanukkah. Hanukkah's message is even when the menorah is extinguished and you're in a dark place, even then light can prevail. That message was not known before. Because you'd think, okay, as long as the temple is standing and protected and we don't have any enemies and there's no one else around, there's no challenge, we're in a good situation. But as soon as you have a powerful Greek army with a powerful philosophy and mighty armies, and they suddenly come and challenge the situation, you'd think, okay, now what? So Hanukkah demonstrated a victory that we can win over even the philosophies of the mighty and all the seductive powers that the Greeks offered, and still celebrate. And that's why Hanukkah is not just reliving the menorah. In many ways, it's the menorah plus more. And that's why we light 8 instead of 7. In Judaism, 7 is a cycle of time, of nature. 8 is symbolic of going beyond nature. The menorah before Hanukkah, when there was only light, it's 7. But when you want to introduce another dimension, that even that light can pierce, even darkness can prevail even in darkness, 8 is the symbol of doing that. In Hasidic terminology, 7 is like Seder Hishtalshelus, the cosmic order. 8 is the step beyond it. Like you'd say, for example, a tzaddik who works his life in a pure way all his life and does the righteous things is one thing. But a person who's fallen and has made a mistake and they can return, they have like the level of a Baal Tshuva. They have power even more than a tzaddik because they have seen the darkness and they have prevailed. So that's like 8 versus 7. And that's why you light the menorah facing outside to the dark of and night. Because its message is all about its relationship with the darkness around it. So when you apply it now to our lives, going back to the initial points I made, if you really spell it out on a more, let's call it psychological, personal level, the story of Hanukkah is as follows. That number one, the ultimate force in your life, no matter how dark you think you are, no matter what challenges you've had, is that light always remains dominant, whether you know it or not. And sometimes it's like a pilot flame. Pilot flame, you don't always know it's burning until you peek and you look. But there's a pilot flame that is always there, no matter what you've gone through. So the message and the symbol of finding the pure olive oil is that each of us have pure olive oil. Nobody can ever defile all of you. So no matter what you've gone through, there's always a pure cruse and flask of oil, number one. Number two, when you do find it, it will burn much longer than you think it will. In other words, you may think it's just a little flame, and then suddenly you realize it can burn for 8 days, which is symbolic of burning the whole cycle of a week, which means really forever. And this is not my own words. Nachmanides, Ramban, writes in the Parsha Ba'alescha. It's a chapter that talks about the menorah. He says a very moving statement. Now, he was a scholar that lived around 1,000 years ago, the time of Rashi, a little after Rashi. So he writes the following. He writes that the menorah in the temple was destroyed. And today we don't light a menorah every day in the temple. We don't even have a temple. Definitely don't have a menorah. He said, but haneres halolu, the flames of Hanukkah, einen ptelim la'elam, will never be extinguished. Because throughout all the years, even when the temple was destroyed and the Jews were exiled, for all the years, till this very day, we still light the Hanukkah lights. That means Hanukkah prevailed in a way that even the temple could not prevail. That means something that, well, the reason for that is because it came from darkness. When something comes from darkness and wins over darkness, darkness cannot conquer it. It's like in Jewish law, no, I don't think this is also in secular law, if somebody has a contract, and then it's challenged or appealed. So if the contract is upheld in an appeal, you can't appeal again. I mean, in our court of law, it works, there's appeals, you could appeal once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, but at some point, someone appeals to the Supreme Court, and you lose that appeal, or you win that appeal, that's it. Which means that if it was never challenged, that contract would not have that much power, because it still can be challenged, you don't know what will happen. But once it's been challenged and it's upheld, that contract can never be challenged again. Psychologically speaking, when you look at yourself and you say, okay, person has, let's say, certain strengths. You could say they have their strengths as long as they were not challenged. Wait till you put them in a difficult situation, then see what happens. But once someone has gone through a difficult situation and they've also prevailed, then you know that nothing can vanquish them. This is the strength that comes out of darkness. So Hanukkah is, the message of Hanukkah is that it's not just light, that even though there was a challenge, and it was a very formidable one, still light won out. And that means that light can no longer be ever destroyed, because it's already shown that nothing can destroy it. It's like what they say, that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And that's what happened throughout history. Hanukkah, remained this shining light of a type of eternal light that persevered through everything. And the most difficult times, talking about the last 2,000 years, you can imagine Jews wandered, were expelled, were killed. Hanukkah still remained standing. And whatever happened, they always attempted and always worked hard at keeping the lights burning. Even during the Holocaust, there's some of these astonishing stories of how the Jews tried to scrap together some oil. I wrote a story a few years ago that I heard from a Holocaust survivor called The Ninth Candle. You got to read the story, it's amazing. I mean, it's written, I wrote it exactly as I heard it. If you go to our website, Ninth Candle, just look Ninth Candle on meaningfullife.com, you'll find it. But you'll find many stories where, in the most difficult circumstances, anything they can do to keep the flame burning. Because it wasn't just some type of ritual light a flame. It was symbolic of our own survival. It was a message to our children that nothing can destroy this light. And that's what the Ramban says. This light can never be destroyed. And he's right, it wasn't. Today, you could say it's easy to light Hanukkah candles, but it wasn't that way for 60 years ago, and that wasn't that way 100 years ago. Today, unfortunately, strangely, less menorahs are lit than they were then, percentage-wise. Which is, of course, a testimony to the irony of comfort zones, that when things are easy, we take it for granted. When someone tells you can't do it, everybody does it. When you know that you could, you say, you know what, I could always do it tomorrow. So that's our own challenge, the complacency of our own generation. So Hanukkah has the message of that type of light that is more powerful than darkness. But there's one final thing, and I'll conclude with that, then we'll light the menorah and actually do it. Not like Bertrand Russell, we'll actually do it. The Rambam style. One point, and then I'll elaborate perhaps afterwards. That is, that it's not just about a light that can overcome darkness, but there's something about the darkness that itself turns into light. So in the Hasidic thought, there's a concept of, they call this hapcha chashechel naher, to transform darkness into light. Or sometimes it's called the yisun er, the light that comes out of the darkness, the power of light that comes out of the darkness. See, it's one thing where you say, okay, there's light, there's dark, and you say, you know, it's, as dark as it was, we still prevailed. That shows that light is more powerful than dark. That's true. But let's talk psychologically, as I was discussing, our own dark corners. What are we supposed to do with them? And we can talk from today till tomorrow and say, bring more light into your life. But the fact is, we do have darkness in our lives. And you can't just talk it away. It's there. It's part of our past. It haunts us. Sometimes it's more dominant in our life. Sometimes it's more dormant. Fine. But it's there. So what are we supposed to do exactly? So of course, lesson number one is you have to bring as much light into your life, as I said, and you can't believe. It's hard to even imagine. If you bring light, it'll dispel darkness. And many of us don't do that. We let the default state control us. So that's one message. But then there's a more interesting one, which is really fascinating, and that is, even darkness itself, when channeled, can become a more powerful light than light itself. In other words, the darkness of your life, whatever it may be, and I will give you examples, can become a catalyst, can be a force that can bring such unbelievable strength and lessons that people who are not there, no matter how much light they've had, they can never have. Just to give you an example of someone I know, someone who grew up in a very abusive home, and only a person who grew up in a home like that can know such darkness. The rest of us can read books, and you can meet people, you can interview, you'll never know it inside out. You know, from the inside, in the inside guts. Only someone that went through the hell can understand what hell is like. There's just simply no way to describe it. And I saw this person, over the years, use that experience, not only not to be bitter and broken and give excuses for having a dysfunctional life, but has helped literally hundreds of people who are exactly in that same place. Now, she didn't begin doing it that way. First, she suffered greatly till she figured out what her life was about, you know, all the confusion. But then at some point, something touched her that brought a certain light in her life, like a Hanukkah flame, and said, enough is enough. I'm not going to be any longer just fighting demons. And she began to help people, understanding them in a way only that she could understand them. And I've seen it with my own eyes, you know, certain wisdom that she learned, ways to compensate, ways to deal with. And she has the credibility because she's been there. Someone's not there, you can't talk to someone who's a war-ravaged person if you haven't been through the war. I'm just using that as a broad example. But there's other examples, specific ones. But you have to be able to shift one key thing. You have to stop being a victim and stop being reactive as a result and become a leader. That's the key challenge, and that's the most difficult thing, because when you've been hurt in life, your darkness, what it does worst of all, is not that it's just dark and ugly or secretive or private and then you're ashamed of it. What it does is it demoralizes you. It weakens you. And you always live like a victim. You may not like to say it that way, but you always are on the defensive. You're always waiting. You're basically great at defense. But there's no offense. You're great at defense. You take any punch. No one can kill you because you've been through everything. But that doesn't make you proactive. That means that the rest of your life you're on, like fighting. You just know how to fight. You know how to protect yourself. And you know that you'll survive anything. But think of that. That means that all your energy is going into surviving anything. Whereas the shift that takes place, and that's really the Hanukkah message, is that there's a point where you have to start realizing this was my darkness and I can use it to create light, not just to fight off enemies. And that requires dedicating your life to helping other people in the same situation. That's a major, major critical thing in all dark situations. Anything that has haunted you, if you begin to use it as a way to help others that haunts them, you begin to redeem yourself of it. As long as you leave it as being a force in your life and you ignore it or you just let it do what it does, you still remain its victim. So there's an expression, "Hamispal ba'at chavere hunen atchila." When you pray for someone else who has a particular need, God answers you first. He helps you. You help someone that has issues like you have, and you'll see how it comes back to heal you in greater ways than all the therapy in the world. Because you have a sensitivity in that particular area that no one else can really relate to as you can, because you've been there. And each one of us, in our own, whatever that darkness has, we have an ability. But you have to begin to think like you're on a mission. And even your dark experiences are part of your mission. It's not an easy thing to do, because you have to get over, number one is getting over that life is not fair. Why did I have to go through this? And don't underestimate how much energy we expend in that type of mode of complaining and so on, and justifiably. But you're still putting a lot of energy in saying, why do I have to? Why? The second thing is the energy that you have to invest in protecting yourself, constantly developing all kinds of elaborate defense mechanisms not to get hurt. Then there's feelings of vengeance, trying to get even to those that hurt you. And again, all justifiable. Bottom line is, however, your life energy is all driven to fight demons. Whereas a person who shifts suddenly realizes, one second, I'm in this world here to do something with my life, to accomplish something. So what do I do with these darker parts of me? Maybe I can help others that have the same thing. Maybe I could identify with them, they identify with me. People who talk about the 12-step program all talk about the same thing. There's some power of the synergy of being with other people who've been through something that you've been through. No one really can explain why. Because you'd think, you'd get weaker if other people like that are recovering alcoholics or not recovering, or other things like that. Because there's something to be said about the synergy of people who identify with each other's challenges. And when you see other people who've been there, it makes the shame a little less. It's easier to release. It's easier to break the silence. It's easier to just come through it. And then, of course, the strength you get when you see other people who've been where you've been and have made it through. It gives you confidence and hope. So I can go on, but there's the final dimension of Hanukkah in that sense. Is not just that light is more powerful than dark, but even the darkness itself becomes a force of light. And that is really the key. Because when you master that, then really nothing can destroy. Because the darkness then becomes your ally. But this requires real shifts and a real change of consciousness of how we deal with things. And realizing that we have a mission even when we're in a dark place. Think of that. So, with that being said, I think it's a good time to light the menorah. Is that a good idea? Well, you want to honor us? You want me to do it? You're asking me to do it? Okay. Fine. You have the matches here? So let me tell you what we're going to do now. We're actually going to demonstrate what I just said, okay? Which is this. even though it's just a menorah, and I'm sure you've seen menorahs lit before, but think of it like the first time you've ever seen a menorah lit. Just try to put yourself in that type of state of mind, state of heart. Because that is what we're doing. You make a blessing, it's a new year. We even make a shechiyanu, which means even though we lit menorahs before, the point here is that we are new people today, and the challenges of last year or other times are not the challenges of today. So the first thing is you have to not think in terms of, I did this already, and it didn't help last time, who expects? So you have to think new. You have to think that this will be it. Okay? As we all know, you go to parties, you go to events, and you always say, I've been there to all these type of things. If you don't think in terms of this can be the beginning of a whole new chapter in your life, trust me, it's very unlikely it's going to actually happen. So that's the first state of mind. Is that fine? So we look at the menorah as a new entity and as a new experience, and it's new light. So what we do is like this. We'll all rise in a moment, and I will make the blessings. There's 3 blessings the first night. Other nights we make 2 blessings. The blessing is on lighting the Ner Hanukkah. Then about the miracles that are done then, and as well as today, the relevance of Hanukkah to us today. And as I said, there's a 3rd blessing we make the first night, which is Shechiyanu, which is always said when you start something new. It's a new Hanukkah. Tomorrow night it won't be made. It's a new. It's like a renewed experience. And then I shall sing for you, with your permission, Haneres Halalo. And we have, what do they call them? The jelly donuts. Look at Velva's face, everybody. You'll see how delicious they are. They're from Israel. Fresh. Crunchy. Crispy. Sorry, you'll appreciate them because Shara makes very good jelly donuts herself. Okay? I didn't taste them, so. There's dreidels for everybody. Little coins. Okay, beautiful. Very nice. Belville, we thank Belville for... and then, let's see, we'll sing, and then we'll see what we do from there. We'll improvise. The lights are going to go out, and we shall... the didgeridoo and the drums are coming. Whatever. We turn this into a nightclub. Okay. Good. Fine. So, let's rise. Yeah. So just in case some of you don't know, there's 8 flames. We light each night 1. Tomorrow will be 2, till the 8th day, next Tuesday night. And we use a shamash. A shamash is like a servant that lights the menorahs. The shamash is like actually a 9th flame, but it's not considered to be one of the Hanukkah lights. There are many reasons for that, but for now we'll just... Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim laveseinu bayamim hahem bizman hazeh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechiyanu v'kimanu v'higiyanu lizman hazeh. Haneyerois halalu, Haneyerois halalu, Haneyerois halalu, halalu, Haneyerois halalu. Anu madlikin al hachuos yam diridam dananam diriyom diridayararim haneray salalum diridam Diridayananayanum, diridayananayanum, Anu amadlikin al hachuos, V'al hanisim, v'al hanifalois, She'osi salavosayanu, She'osi salavosayanu, Bayo amimah bizma an hazeh, Bayo mimah bizma an hazeh, bizman hazeh, al yedei kayanecho hagdayishim, al yedei kayanecho G'dayishim, al yedei kayanecho hagdayishim, al yedei kayanecho hagdayishim, al yedei kayanecho G'dayishim, al yedei kayanecho hagdayishim. Yarararai, 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 you know. Yarararai, 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 yarararai. Yarararai, 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 you know. Yarararai, 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 narai, narai, nano. Chol shmei nesimei Chanukah neides alalu keideshem. Chol shmei nesimei Chanukah neides alalu keideshem. Chol shmei nesimei Chanukah neides alalu keideshem, 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 keideshem. V'yein lanu reshus lishtamesh bohem. Lishtamesh bohen, lishtamesh bohen. V'chol shmei nesimei Chanukah neides alalu keideshem. Chol shmei nesimei Chanukah neides alalu keideshem. V'yein lanu reshus lishtamesh bohen. Elo l'reison bilvad, bilvad. Kidei leidei sulalel, leidei sulalel, Shimcho hagadol. Leidei sulalel, leidei sulalel, Shimcho hagadol. Eyal Nisecha V'yal Nifleisecha V'yal Yeshuasecha Al Nisecha V'yal Nifleisecha Al Yeshuasecha Al Nisecha V'yal Nifleisecha V'yal Yeshuasecha Al Nisecha V'yal Nifleisecha V'yal Yeshuasecha Al Nisecha V'yal Nifleisecha V'yal Yeshuasecha. Happy Hanukkah, everybody. Happy Hanukkah, everybody. Why don't you take some donuts and we can hang out a bit.